We're ready to begin now. A couple of things from last week. Just a reminder, some people couldn't make it last week. And as I mentioned, you can see that generally speaking, archaeologists are, they generally believe that what is found within these black lines would be what remained of the Kotel after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, perhaps after the destruction from the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Anything above that, there are 4 layers that are above that. That actually was, those were actually restored by the Umayyad dynasty, which is in roughly the 700s. And then all the small bricks above came and in the Turkish regime over that and their rule over Eretz Israel. So let me see here. Let me. I think I'm going to. Sorry. Whoops. 1 second. Okay, I want to enlarge this right now. So.
Rabbi Myers, if you go to a slideshow format, which is at the bottom of that window, over to the right, further over to the right. It looks like an etnachta.
It looks like an etnachta?
Keep on going a little more to the right before the slider. Just click, there's a button, not the one you have. It's the last button before the slider on the bottom.
What is it? Fine, what's a slider?
The thing that goes back and forth, it looks like a slide where it says 50. Go down, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Stop, go to your right.
Oh, I know, yes.
1, 2, 3, 4 pieces to your right.
I know that, right. I don't know why I didn't do that. Okay, very good. So we're now going to move on. Also, a second reminder, and this is very important. We'll talk about this later. This is called Barclays Gate. It's right on the right-hand side near the Mugrabi Gate, on the women's side of the exposed Kotel. A man by the name of Barclay realized that this large ashlar here was really extended inside the Mugrabi Gate, of which the wall you can see. It extends all the way in, and he determined that must have been a lintel from a prior gate. And the assumption now is these small stones were actually the opening to the gate. And from the best that we can recollect, or that we can reconstruct, this gate may well have been what the Mishnah in Midot says was the Kiponos gate. Kiponos, the gate may have gotten its name from the person who dedicated it, but it was one of the gates that surrounded, that was on Har HaBayit, through which people could enter. So we'll talk a little bit later, not today, but another time, about how they arrived at this conclusion. And here you can get one more view of Barclays Gate. There is the lintel, approximately 2 meters high. And these are the stones which are used to fill in. In other words, the gate was here. Now we're ready to go on. This particular illustration is very instructive. We're going to stay on it for a little bit so that we can get a firm understanding of what the Beit HaMikdash and the surrounding area looked like at the time of Herod. And of course, that pretty much remained all the way through to the year 70 CE with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, here we are looking at, on this wall, this particular wall here, this wall is really the western wall of Har HaBayit. When we talk about the western wall, we're talking about the west part of the Temple Mount of Har HaBayit. And that wall was a retaining wall. It was intended to retain the earth that had been moved and sort of transplanted onto Har HaBayit by Herod to make it more impressive, so that he could expand the Beit HaMikdash itself. So the Kotel where you and I stand usually is right here. The women's section will be right here. And notice there's a gate. And that gate, we think, was Kiponos Gate. And that being the case, You can see it on the women's side right next to the that large snake-like entrance to Har HaBayit, the only open entrance to Har HaBayit from the west. Now, as we stand here, we're in the Tyropian Valley. Notice it's quite low, the Tyropian Valley. And this depiction is of how the Beit HaMikdash looked 2,000 years ago. Remember, you and I, when we go there, stand on 2,000 years of rubble, unfortunately, in some cases, food, not so much food, but other elements that had been thrown out and eventually became a part of the earth above the street. But we're depicting what the street actually looked like at this time. There was a bridge, which you can see a little part of it here, that connected the upper city of Yerushalayim, which is now the Jewish quarter and the Armenian quarter and the Christian quarter, to Har HaBayit. The wealthy people lived in the upper city. The poorer people lived actually down here. There's a number of reasons why, but probably one of the most prominent reasons is that water flows down. And so the water that was used in the upper city actually eventually came down here. It came to settle, whether it was used directly or not. And of course, the people in the upper city could afford to get water carriers to bring the water up to them. This was the actual Beit HaMikdash itself with its surroundings. In this course, we're not going to go over all of the surroundings of the Beit HaMikdash. This is the west end, which would be the Kodesh HaKodashim would be here. It appears that the Kippat HaSela, the Dome of the Rock, is on this part of the Beit HaMikdash here, and it stands over our traditional site of what we call the Even HaShetiyah, or the foundation stone of the world. What exactly that means, and now it became the foundation stone, that probably is open to speculation, but that is our tradition. Now, here, again, right now we're not on Har HaBayit yet, but this is called the Ophel. We've talked about the Ophel. The Ophel was an extension of the Ir David, and people would come. They would usually enter the Har HaBayit from the south, either on these gates, these two gates, which are called they're called the Huldah gates, because Huldah Hanaviah, Huldah, the prophetess, sat here, and therefore these gates bore her name. This is a huge entranceway where you had irregular steps, so that people would have to look down when they would go up to Har HaBayit as a form of respect. And so in other words, the various different steps were not the same height, one from the other. So you had to be careful when you went up. Now we're looking also, this is also something of Herod's innovation right here. This is we call it the Stoa, S-T-O-A. It's also called the Basilica in some places. A basilica is a long, narrow building. And so now we need to ask what was the function of the basilica or the Stoa? Two points to make. One is Herod was obsessed with being considered a supreme leader, and of course he worked very hard to get Roman recognition, but he also wanted recognition from other countries in the world, and he would invite dignitaries to Yerushalayim so that they should see its magnificence. But they weren't allowed to go on Har HaBayit. Non-Jews were not allowed. There were signs posted that under penalty of death, non-Jewish people were not to be going onto the Har HaBayit. So he created what I guess we have to call the first skyboxes right here, so that they could view from this area without going onto Har HaBayit directly. They could view various ceremonies and that which went on Har HaBayit. There is speculation that we know the Gemara tells us that the Sanhedrin no longer issued capital punishment 40 years before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, or roughly what we would call 30 CE, roughly using these years. And the Gemara tells us they actually moved from the Lishkat HaGazit, which was in the Beit HaMikdash proper, and they eventually moved away from it. We don't know exactly when, but some speculation is that they occupied a part of the Stoa because they no longer could issue dicta of capital punishment, so it became knasot and various other forms of adjudication of cases, and so and that was done according to some people. It may well have been done up here. Okay, a question so far? Anybody? Okay, then let's go ahead, and we're going to take, first of all, a reminder that, first of all, a reminder that this is Har HaZeitim. This is the depiction of Har HaZeitim, and this would be Har HaTzofim, Mount Scopus and Mount Olive to the south. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. This was a massive staircase that we only knew was a real staircase to get into the Har HaBayit. We only learned that probably, or we could only authenticate it with Hashem's chesed, when we removed the occupying Jordanian forces from Yerushalayim, when they uncovered the rubble. This did not exist in 1967. It does not exist now. But it was found on this, as we got lower and lower to get onto the street, they found the staircase. And they realized this was a massive second entrance to Har HaBayit. Those of you who have taken the tunnel tours, that tour actually would take you roughly from here all the way back to the north exit of Har HaBayit. Okay. Now, this is the saga of Robinson's Arch. This picture, I mentioned that many years ago I was perusing a bookstore in Yerushalayim, and the bookstores they have there, many of them are certainly not set in a Western cultural format where you have everything listed in nice, neat order, prices on everything. One of this particular bookstore that I was in was actually right near the Great Synagogue, just a little bit north of the Great Synagogue. A typical structure of New Yerushalayim at a very high ceiling. Books were piled from floor to ceiling. And I was sort of looking around, and I saw toward the top shelf, I saw a 2-volume set of works called The Oldest Photographs of Yerushalayim. So I couldn't get at it myself, so I asked the person who was there, who was somewhat disturbed by the fact that I would be bothering him. But the point is, I said, I'd like to get that book. And he said, indeed, all right. He went up to the top. I asked him how much the 2-volume set should cost. I forgot what he told me, but it certainly was worth it. And indeed, there are 2 volumes of pictures dating back to 1856 or something of that nature. This particular picture that you're looking at, I've scanned and put on the screen, and it's fascinating for a number of reasons. The most, of course, its age makes it fascinating. Second of all, you have a protrusion here out of the wall. And under the protrusion, sitting right there, is an Arab who undoubtedly has passed into the other world by now. And he's sitting right under the arch. Now, today, if you were to go there, which we do, it's one of the most prominent features of the western wall of Yerushalayim. It's called Robinson's Arch. We're going to talk about why it's called that in a moment, is up here. Here it is in the picture. Here's the Arab sitting down. He'd bump his head probably if he stood up. here it is today. And one of the things I like most that archaeologists do is they usually try to they know most people are somewhere between 5 and 6 feet. So they usually place a person in something that they want to give us perspective on so that we can see. Notice how far down they had to dig till they got to the main street of Yerushalayim. And of course, nowadays, you can get there. I would urge anybody who goes that you should go to the Davidson Center. It's called the Davidson Center. I don't know how many of you have been there. If you haven't, it's worth every moment of your time to go there. You can get English earphones. You can go around yourself. There are tours, but you do have to let them know in advance. It's at the very south end of the Kotel, and you'll be able just ask about Davidson, and they'll be able to direct you. The Davidson Center deals with the south end of Yerushalayim, the Ophel, and its origins and the various different cultures that were there from the time of David HaMelech all the way through at least the Turkish period. So it's worthwhile seeing. Now the question is, what is Robinson Arch an arch to? Well, originally when Robinson came, he saw this protrusion, and his theory was that this must have been the bridge that Josephus talked about that connected the upper city to Har HaBayit. And of course, that's very good for the people who were doing that because they didn't have to go down into the valley. Wealthy people, can afford to take the shortcuts, and bridges are made for them. The less wealthy people, of course, were down here at the lower level, as we mentioned earlier. So his speculation was that this arch that protruded was actually a support for a bridge, that very bridge that Josephus, the historian, claimed was that led from the upper city of Jerusalem to the Har HaBayit. But B'chasdei Hashem, eventually, over the course of time, we began to realize that this was not the bridge. We'll see where the bridge really was, but rather it was a staircase. This right here is this. That's the staircase. That's the support to a staircase, not a bridge. And of course, that can be confusing, and people would walk up here. You can see it's pretty massive. So people would be able to enter, especially on Yontif, when people would come, the Shalosh Regalim, people would come in large contingents, and so they needed to be able to accommodate them. Once again, to give you perspective, this is the Ophel here, the southwest corner of Har HaBayit, and our Kotel is just a little bit north of here. Anybody have questions, please? Okay, then we can go on. Now, this particular picture, I took probably about 15 years ago. It's very instructional for us in our course because what you're looking at is this. And of course, that would be this. Here we are. But let's take a look and see the landmarks that are here. So the next time in Yirtzeh Hashem you go to Yerushalayim, when you walk down the steps, it's called the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi steps or passageway, the first thing you really see, before you even see the Kotel, is straight ahead of you is Robinson's Arch. And then you can, in the background, we have Har HaZeitim, which now, of course, has the largest Jewish cemetery, that in Warsaw, in the world. And of course, many sacred, all neshamot are sacred, but very many famous sacred neshamot had been laid to rest here. At the top of Har HaZeitim, you can see it in the distance when you go. That's called, that was once called the Intercontinental Hotel. King Hussein used it as his private lodging when he would come to visit Yerushalayim. I don't know how often, but that's what he did. Now it's actually a diplomatic building. But the people that are Har Zaitim has graves actually that go all the way around the mountain itself. It's probably good to go with some sort of formal protection when you go, because you do have to go to pass through Arab neighborhoods to get there. And even on Har Zaitim, there are Arab neighborhoods. You are also seeing here the dome of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Aqsa. Now, the Al-Aqsa Mosque derives its name from the word katzeh in Hebrew. The Muslim belief is that Muhammad on his night ride came to as far north as Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim, as it's often said, and I'm sure it's correctly so, is never mentioned specifically in the Quran. That in itself is not evidence of anything per se, but it does tell us that it doesn't have to be that he came here. And they established a mosque, the Umayyads established a mosque on Har HaBayit to memorialize the fact that he prayed here. Now, according to Islamic belief, any place that Muhammad or his horse tread or touched became acquired in perpetuity for Islam, which means, see, now the reason I mention this is because, of course, we have a great deal of disagreement about who should control Har HaBayit and who should control the Kotel and who should control this area, which is so sacred. Now, according to Islamic belief, there is a concept of waqf. Many of you may have seen it, some of you know, but others of us may have glossed over it. In English, we spell it W-A-K-F, waqf, which means trusteeship. Every Muslim is a trustee to protect what they consider to be Arab lands. And that's why we're not even talking about the people that say there was no Beit HaMikdash. That's simply, obviously, contradicts everything we know about history. But there is the belief that Muhammad actually touched or somehow communicated with Allah at the Kotel, what we call the Kotel, and therefore it became acquired in perpetuity, even the Kotel, which of course shocks us very much. So that's one of the reasons it's really, they are very intractable about this. It's very hard to say to them, look, let's see if we can work something out, because many Muslims believe it's not there, they do not have the authority to work something out. So that's what we're talking about here. And that's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And of course, if you go a couple of hundred meters north, you get to the Kippat HaSela, the Dome of the Rock. One other thing I'd like to mention here, by the way, this is the Ophel. Once again, I know that I get repetitive with this, but the more you hear, the better, more easily I think you'll be able to orient yourself. Now, between Har HaZeitim and Har HaBayit is the Kidron Valley. Now, we spoke about the Kidron Valley in the first couple of discussions. We're going to come back to it. But here you have the mountain, in between is a valley, and then, of course, you have Har HaBayit. Now, right here, the Gemara tells us, it's a Mishnah actually, in Sukkah. The Mishnah tells us about that there were a number of tekiyot, shofar blowings, on Har HaBayit daily, but Erev Shabbat, there were 6 additional ones that were offered, and we're going to see now where the Kohen stood to make these pronouncements to tell people that Shabbat is coming, they should stop working, lavdilotam, to get them to stop working Erev Shabbat, and then of course the second one is to tell them of the onset of Shabbat. Those were 6 shofar blasts. minute. Uh-oh. I should be able to. Oh, wait, there it is. Wait, I'm sorry. I don't have it. Give me just a moment. It might be out of order. Should be able to. Oh, here we are. It was sometimes when we move it, it gets out of order. So now let's expand it. This is the place where the Kohen would sound not a shofar, a trumpet. The Gemara talks about what exactly was sounded, but it doesn't matter exactly what the instrument was, but it does appear, or the Gemara concludes, that it was a trumpet rather than a shofar, and that he stood right here on the southwest corner of Har Bayit, the very corner that we saw earlier. There, right here. He stood right here, only higher, because this has been leveled off, but actually the Kotel was several meters higher than what we have here. It's leveled off here. It was done by the Turks, but it was higher. So here's where he stood, right here. And if you and I are the ones who took the picture, we're standing in the Jewish quarter. And he's sounding the trumpet to let us know it's time to stop work, and eventually it's time to sanctify Shabbos. So here we go. All right, so this is where he stood. This is, now what about, how do they know colors? Colors, colors and sounds are hard to duplicate, but actually, when forgive me, when I say we, I certainly had nothing to do with it, but I identify with them. When our archaeologists cleared away the rubble from Har Bayit, they actually found significant segments of these quasi capitals that were here. And this was the color, the blue, the azure blue, and this earth tone type of brown here and here. These are, in other words, this image is taken because we found remnants of it at the base of the southwest corner of Har Bayit. Now, how do we know this is where it is? This is one of the stunning things of archaeology. Look, archaeologists can be wrong, and a lot of times they may draw conclusions, but they know that they have uncovered less than 1% of almost any archaeological site. Even if they take a certain section, the fact that they didn't find something doesn't mean it never existed. It could well have been a few meters north, and they haven't gotten there yet, or south. And it's interesting that in the Gemara, we have a phrase that says, Lo ra'inu eino rai. The fact that I didn't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist or didn't exist. Gemara talks about that in terms of halacha and mishnayot, but it applies across the board. That lo ra'inu, the fact that we haven't seen it, eino raya, is not evidence that it doesn't exist. In English, there's a very clever phrase, absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence. The fact that we haven't found certain things, it doesn't matter what it is. Here we're talking about the Kedusha of Har Bayit. The fact that we haven't found certain things doesn't mean that they did not exist, because absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Now, what is evidence that is not absent was this remarkable find at the very base of the southwest corner of Har Bayit. And they uncovered it, and to our great, not only amazement, but good fortune, we actually have the writing here. And it says, Levet Hatkiya Lehach. We didn't say, third word isn't so clear, but it's Levet Hatkiya Lahachriz. The Bayit, or Beit, it means merely a compartment or a location. The location of sounding the tkiyot of the trumpet or of a shofar to make pronouncements. There it is. They found it right under, right here. Or in this one, it would be right here. This is where they found. And I know that they, I know that that they had found it here. I believe it's even still displayed right here. And if anybody's seen it in the last year or two, I'd be happy to have that confirmed. But can you imagine you find an actual stone which determines where an event which is clearly mentioned in the Mishnah happened, when and where. Okay. Now, during the time, that's the first temple, so we're moving along. Herod, of course, was a tremendous builder. And he was, we have to admit that he was really close to a genius when it came to creating in his mind. He knew what he wanted to see happen. Many of us, because we don't necessarily know architecture, or I don't even have a vision of what I want things to be. But he had the vision and he had the wherewithal, because so many people were under his thumb, to get things done. Now, again, our wonderful tour guide that we had on Tisha B'Av, who truly knows her stuff very, very well, she talked about Herod and his very unstable personality. But he knew what he was doing when he's building. If you saw Herodion, then Eve Harold, gave us a wonderful tour. Herodion itself was remarkable. I urge you, if you enter Jaffa Gate, Shar Yafo, right to your right is a huge building. It's probably the biggest complex that you have in Yerushalayim, aside from the Temple Mount. Just make a right-hand turn, and you'll enter this gate, and you can go. You should consider spending about a half a day there. I would say at least 2-3 hours, because they have various different civilizations that are naturally represented, because this was Herod's fortress. It's called Herod's fortress, but it wasn't only his. It was the perfect location to defend Yerushalayim and also do surveillance right from there, because you had the Hinnom Valley, which is here, and therefore it towered above in every sense. Towers in terms of physical towers, and in terms of height, it towered over almost everything around there. This is both the entrance to the Armenian quarter, but again, you enter through Shar Yafo. Also, if you note right here, you can't tell real well, but this is what is called erroneously Migdal David. We call it Migdal David, then it's David's tower. It certainly is not David's tower. It was a mosque, which it was called Masjid Daoud. The Muslims built a mosque there because they believed that David HaMelech davened here. Now, it's unlikely that David HaMelech davened here, because during David's time, this part of Yerushalayim was not at all developed. Not at all. Not by Jews, not by anybody, because it's on the western hills of Yerushalayim. But nevertheless, their legend is that he was there, and therefore they made a mosque, and we call it Migdal David. To me, again, this is my own. I oftentimes tell my students, everybody's entitled to my opinion. I don't know whether you subscribe to that, but in my opinion, it's really sad that this has become one of the two most famous faces of Yerushalayim. That, the Migdal David, they call Migdal David, and two, of course, the Kippat HaSela, the Dome of the Rock. Both have nothing to do with Judaism per se. Questions? All right, we'll take another 5 minutes or so. Question is, how do they get all of those ashlars? Again, they're called, these large stones are called ashlars. They're not stones anymore. They're not bricks anymore. They are, they're quarried. Actually, they're quarried not too far. They were quarried not too far from what is now Ben Yehuda Street. Not too far. Those of you who have been to Ben Yehuda Street and Rehov Yafo, you know that if you're walking toward the old city, if you look at your left, you'll see there's streets there, Rav Kook Street, etc. Well, there is also there a police station and a large Russian church, and right near there you can actually see one of the places that was a quarry for It could be for the Beit HaMikdash, but at the very least for the old city of Yerushalayim. These are the stones. This is how they hoisted it up in terms of this crane. And if you look in here, if you look closely, you'll be able to see that there are actually people inside that wheel. One of my seniors called them human gerbils. And they're actually, unfortunately, it's true. That's probably what they did all day, because the more they ran, of course, the more they could hoist whatever weights had to be lifted. This is an interesting image because it shows you and me the extent of Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh at the time, roughly the time of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Let's orient ourselves. The Ir David, the oldest part of Yerushalayim. David expanded this to the Ophel, which we've examined fairly seriously today. This is the Shiloach. This is the pond through which the waters of the Gihon were brought. Remember, the Gihon is here in the Kidron Valley. It's underneath the ground, subterranean. It was diverted, the waters were diverted by Chizkiah Melech, and they eventually led to the Shiloach, which you, of course, can visit today. Very, very wonderful tour and just a walk. If you want to hike, it's really terrific. Now, here is Har HaBayit. And as Yerushalayim expanded, and Herod did his very best to have the Jews expand. If you remember, we talked about Nehemiah, who was able to convince 1 out of every 10 Jews to live in Yerushalayim. So here, Yerushalayim became the showplace of the Jewish people. And even though the majority of the Jewish population always, it seemed, historically lived within 25 square miles of Yerushalayim, many Jews lived in. So here we are this is the lower city, this is the Tyropian Valley. Now you can see there is now a network of walls that are built. One is right here. That constitutes the northern wall. This wasn't, and then of course, ultimately, it's called the third wall was built. Here is the Herod's castle, as we just saw before. And this wall extends all the way into the Ben Hinnom Valley, where it meets the Kidron Valley. Kidron Valley and the Hinnom Valley. Another angle of this is, again, here's the Hinnom Valley, the Kidron Valley. Here is what's called the second wall. Up here is the third wall. Here is Herod's castle. And when we enter Shar Yafo, we actually, or Jaffa Gate, we actually enter here, and Herod's castle's right to our right. And if you decide to go straight to the Kotel and not go around, you enter the Shuk, and you're actually entering what is called the Transversal Valley. Those of you who have gone that way notice that, of course, you're going down fairly steeply. That's because you're entering into a valley. And then finally, we get to the Beit HaMikdash. Next week, we'll pick it up with this sign. You've descended 3 meters below the level of the present Jewish quarter. You have gone back 2,000 years in time to the upper city of Jerusalem in the Herodian period. So we'll start next week in Yirtzeh Hashem, and we'll meet at 8 o'clock, Bezras Hashem. We will start by going a little bit on a tour of what Yerushalayim looked like 2,000 years ago. If you say 2,000 years in 3 meters, that means it's never that neat, but every foot that you go down is 200 years. 10 feet, 2,000 years. So that's where we're at. And Yirtzeh Hashem will pick it up next week.